So welcome everyone to Lesson 1, Israel, Fact and Fiction. This over a little bit. So they tell a story of a guy, we'll call him Gary. He meets his friend and he says, "What's doing?" He says, "I'm planning my 25th wedding anniversary." He says, "That's great. What are you planning on doing?" He says, "I'm going to take my wife to the Bahamas." He says, "That's fantastic. That's a pretty big gift for a 25th wedding anniversary. I wonder what you're going to do for the 50th wedding anniversary." He says, "For the 50th, I'm going to go back and pick her up." When we talk about 50th anniversary, so, what we all experienced on October 7th was exactly 50 years, almost to the day, October 6th and October 7th, of the start of the Yom Kippur War. I remember, not that long ago, when it came Yom Kippur. For those of you who are here, some of you were here on Yom Kippur, and I gave a talk on Yom Kippur, I think it was called Nidre, about the Yom Kippur War. It was either by Yisker or called Nidre, one of those two. And we talked about the Yom Kippur War. And at the time, who would have imagined that 2 weeks later, the very exact same thing is going to be experienced, and perhaps in many ways even worse. What's interesting is that the Yom Kippur War happened on a holy day, the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur. And the current war, what we'll call the Gaza War, started on Simchas Torah, which is a very joyous holiday. Very different than Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is a solemn holiday. Simchas Torah is a very joyous holiday. And of course, there's a seat there. You can sit there. And of course, there has been many different emotions, feelings being experienced over the last couple months. And the tremendous amount of wavering back and forth with discussions and debates and arguments and so many things. And it's come to a point that people are learning their so-called facts from Facebook memes that someone posts. If it's on Facebook, it has to be true, right? Isn't that how it goes? And if someone posted it, for sure it has to be true. And if someone posts numbers to their memes, and they write this amount of people and that amount and this percentage, then for sure it's true. Because how else would you how else could you make up a percentage? It has to be right? No, who said no? Okay. Now, a friend of mine approached me, and he asked me with all sincerity about what's going on, and I realized that this is something that's necessary. Little did I realize how much it's necessary when I'm actually looking around the room and seeing how many of you have come here to hear to hear this perspective. What I'm going to give you is not my perspective. It's the perspective of Torah. It's the Jewish perspective, to the best of my knowledge. And I assume that you've come here because you wanted to hear that. Because if you wanted a secular perspective, you could have gone to Fox or CNN. They have a lot of discussions about this. So People seem to be lost, confused. And someone very honestly and sincerely said, what's wrong with a two-state solution? That very word, solution, already comes into question. But my friends, this is more than this. This is a battle for the hearts and minds of our very people and of our very nation. This is not just about a strip of land called Gaza. And this doesn't go back not to 2005, when there was the disengagement of Gaza. It doesn't go back just to Camp David, which we'll talk about. It doesn't go back just to the Six-Day War, which we'll talk about. It doesn't go back to 1948, which we'll talk about. It doesn't go back to the founding of Zionism, the 1900s, which we'll talk about. It doesn't even go back to the founding of our people, even before Abraham and even before Sarah and Isaac. This goes back to the very creation of the world. So this didn't start on October 7th, and when we understand that, when we take a different perspective, when we view the entire so-called conflict in a different way, we will begin to appreciate more than just a land of Israel, but ourselves as a people. And so, the solution is not about two states. The solution is about our souls, our hearts and minds. That is the solution. What the government does, we don't have control over. What the Knesset does, we don't have control over. What Washington does, we don't have control over. We do have control over the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we understand. And when I meet another person in the street, or another friend that talks on Facebook or wherever it is, I will know what I believe is to be true and what I know is to be true. We're going to begin with a text that you see in your booklet, text number 1 on page 2. Before that, I had a little thing here. So today's lesson is going to talk primarily from Israel from inception. We're going to focus primarily until 1967. Part 2, which is next week, will go primarily from 1967 until today. When I say 1967, I'm talking obviously about the Six-Day War, but also the era and things that happened in association and connection with the Six-Day War. And it's very important to understand that everything that is part of both the demographics and the geographical location of Israel the way it is today, and the discussions that are being talked about, Gaza, the West Bank, etc., all of that started after the Six-Day War. So that's why it's important to come back next week to hear about that part, which is not going to be the primary focus of today. As a matter of fact, the word Gaza will not be mentioned too much today, probably not at all. Fact and fiction. Can you answer these questions? The name Palestine was introduced by 1, the UN, 2, the Romans, 3, the PLO, or 4, the Zionists? Romans. Very good. PLO. Okay, next question. The Jews returning to Israel was, number 1, in 1948 after the Holocaust, 2, the 1800s due to pogroms in Russia, 3, desire for redemption in 1930s, or 4, the Zionist movement in the 1900s. Can you see? Am I blocking anyone? Okay. It is all of the above. Thank you. It was all of the above. And one more question. Zionism is 1, a colonial movement, 2, a nationalist movement, 3, a religious movement, or 4, a Jewish survival movement. Once again, the answer is all of the above. Depends how you define Zionism. You could define Zionism how you want. Now, we're going to begin by understanding what is our connection to the land. There could be. If you're a Zionist and you consider it colonialism, then it is. Why not? Okay. That's what some people feel. Some people feel it's not. These are Zionists. If somebody describes themselves as a Zionist, they may believe that. Right? Who's telling you what Zionism has to be? All the Zionists throughout history have claimed different things. And that was the point there. So, the original name Palestine came from the Romans. That is correct. Yes. So, let's go to text number 1. This is from the prophet Daniel. What happened with the prophet Daniel? The prophet Daniel was in exile. He was in Babylonia. Israel was in ruins. The Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. And by the way, one more thing. I want to give a thank you to Lee and to Paula for helping set up today. And also to all the sponsors. Many of you have sponsored this class, and as you see, it was well worth it, and we also had a tremendous breakfast to go along with it. Upon learning that the decree had been written, going back to this. So the city, the country of Israel is in the ruins. The city of Jerusalem is destroyed. The Beis HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, is destroyed. And Daniel is now in exile. And he's in the king's palace. And you probably heard of the story of Daniel in the lion's den. And the reason that he was thrown in the lion's den was because of this story. Upon learning that the decree had been written, Daniel went to his home, where the upstairs room, there were windows facing Jerusalem. 3 times a day he kneeled and prayed and gave thanks to his God, just as he had done beforehand. And because of this, he was eventually sent into the lion's den and, as we know, miraculously saved. But this scene describes here, we see how Jews all over the world, till this very day, no matter where they have been in the last 3,000 years of history, have always turned and focused towards Jerusalem. If you're in South Africa, you're facing north. If you're in America, you're facing east. If you're in Australia, you're facing northwest. Whatever direction you're going, you're facing towards Jerusalem. You know, I was talking this week to the architect about remodeling the buildings that we have, remodeling the shul. And he said, wouldn't it just be easier if you just turn the building that way? I said we can't do that, we have to face east. So what we see here is that Daniel, being the prophet at the time, he was praying towards east. And remember, the Holy Temple was at that point had already been destroyed. Very few Jews were living in Israel at the time. And these events that transpired 2,400 years ago, from after the destruction of the Holy Temple, yet we see how important that is part of his life. And so, we see how important Israel is and how much it holds place in Jewish life. Let's take a look at some more text. Text number 2. This is from the prayer, which we say every single day. Tikah b'shofar gadol l'cheiratenu. Sound the great shofar for our freedom. Raise a banner to gather our exiles and gather us from the four corners of the earth into our land. Blessed are you who gathers the dispersed of his people, Israel. Okay, so we're asking God to gather us from the four corners of the earth and bring us to our land. When we do the benching every day, we start off with saying this prayer, Al Nar Bavel. I'm not going to read the translation. Text 3a and 3b. Shir Hamalos 3b, a song of ascents. When God returns the returnees of Zion, we will have been like dreamers. Our mouths will be filled with laughter and our tongues with song. All right, they will say then among the nations, God has done amazing things for this nation. This is all part of a prayer that we say from Psalms. Grace after meal, text C3. Have compassion on your people, on Israel, on your city, Jerusalem, on Zion, the dwelling place of your glory, and the kingship of the house of David. Rebuild Jerusalem, the holy city, speedily in our days. So, never have we forgotten this land. And so therefore, as we see, it's a very important part of our Jewish life. But why do we need a homeland? Why is it that important? And what claim do we have to the land of Israel? This is a question that we're all being faced with today. Why do you have the right to the land of Israel? You say you're a Jew, so I've been living here for a few thousand years. So, you're coming back now. Let's take a look at more about how much of an impact Israel has with Jewish life. The glass is broken to remember the destruction of Jerusalem, right? The glass is broken under the chuppah. Why? To remember the destruction of Jerusalem. May God console you amongst the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. Some people, I go to mourners or after a funeral, and we say this consoling. May you be consoled amongst the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. So in other words, what we're saying is that a mourner who is mourning today is mourning together with all the Jewish people who are mourning Zion and Jerusalem. After this Pesach Seder, or after Yom Kippur, we say, next year in Jerusalem. And, So we say next year in Jerusalem. We find many of the great sages who have wanted to come to Jerusalem, to come to Israel, should I say, even after they have passed. For example, Maimonides. This is the tomb of Maimonides in the city of, anyone know? What? Tzfat, close.
No wrong.
Close. Tiberia. This is where the Rambam Maimonides is buried. He was brought there after his death. He said that if he can't be there after his death, he should if he can't be there before, at least to be buried there. We just read the story of Jacob being asked to go there. The tomb of Yehuda HaLevi, he lived in Spain. He immigrated and was buried in Israel. And he said the famous words that we'll read in text number 5. Libi b'mizrach v'anochi b'sof ma'arev. My heart is in the east, and mine in the ends of the west. How can I taste what I eat, and how could it be severed? How shall I render my vows and my bonds while Zion is yet in the fetters of Rome, and I am in the shackles of Arabia? So we see this is from Rabbi Yehuda Halevi praying, as even while he was living in Spain, praying to come back to Jerusalem, to Israel. Many of the great sages made aliyah to Israel throughout the generations. And you're talking way before 1948. As you see, text number 4, Maimonides says, taking a step back, text number 4, the great sages would kiss the boundaries of the land of Israel, kiss its stones and roll in its dust. It says, written, your servants cherish her stones and favor her dust. Now, back then it was a little bit more difficult to get to Israel. Today you get on an El Al flight and you're there in a few hours. Back then it took months. Sometimes you had to go by ship, and then sometimes you in most cases you had to travel. Excuse me. You had to travel by camel to get there. So it was a big deal when you finally reached the land of Israel. Some of the famous aliyahs to Israel. This is 1915. This was an immigration camp. It says on the sign, Va'ad Hatzirim L'Eretz Yisrael. The Zionist Commission of Palestine. It's interesting. In Hebrew it says Aleph Yod, which means Eretz Yisrael, and in English it says Palestine. That's sign. In 1915, Eretz Yisrael means the land of Israel. Yeah, Aleph Yod stands for Eretz Yisrael. 1932 to 1934. The Aliyah to Israel, when people started seeing what's going on there, they obviously started making their ways out of Europe. I'm going backwards here. There's a famous Aliyah to Israel in Yemen, 1949. A lot of Yemenites were actually from the earlier ones that came to Israel. We all see what's going on in Yemen today and why that was important. Georgia, 1969, 1974, which is very important because this tells us about the beginning of the Soviets coming to Israel. Not the Soviets, those coming from the Soviet Union. The Jews from the Soviet Union coming to Israel. But the truth is it really began way before that. You have a list of all the famous aliyahs in your book. Page 12 and 13. No, what page is it on there? 6 and 7. Sorry, I have the wrong page. All the great aliyahs, notable aliyahs through the centuries. Now, another thing that you may not know is the Chabad Aliyah. In 1764, first organized group of Aliyah of Hasidim led by Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Permishlan. In 1777, a large group of Hasidic families make Aliyah under the leadership of Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk, who was a Chabad Chassid. And I'll tell you another thing that you don't know about Chabad. Chabad was the very first Israel charity that was organized back at this time in the 1770s. And till today, it's still active. It's called Kolel Chabad. It's still active as the largest, I think, definitely one of the largest charities in Israel. It's actually run by a cousin of ours. You're like, of course, right? Yeah, okay. If anybody's ever been to the Western Wall, if you make an about face, there's a big, beautiful building right behind the Western Wall that says Kolel Chabad. That charity was founded by the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, and in the late 1700s. And not only that, but if you look at the book of Tanya, which is the first Chabad Rebbe's book, the teachings, you'll find many, many letters there encouraging his Hasidim to send funds to Israel. Not only that, but he eventually, as many of you know, he was arrested. Eventually, he was released. And one of the reasons they said, because the Tsar said that you're supporting the Ottoman Empire, which the Tsar was at odds with as we'll soon see, about the Ottoman Empire. And they said, how do you know? Because you're sending funds to Israel, which is under the Ottoman Empire. So this is just to show you that this is not something that started in 1948. This has been going on way, way before that. Yes?
I just want to add also, not just the living ones make Aliyah, but the dead, Jacob and
Yes,
Joseph.
I did point that out before.
Send my bones to
Yes, that's right, Jacob and Joseph.
Yeah.
So, with all that being said, comes the big question. And the big question is, why is it so important? So we see that it's very important. We see how much it makes a difference in Jewish life. We see how many people have tried to go to Israel. And the movements, both the movements going back, we'll call them the ancient movements, and then you have the modern Zionist movements to come to Israel. What is it exactly that is inspiring so many Jewish people? You could say the temple is destroyed, been exiled for so long. So why do we have the claim to the land? Now I would open up the floor, but I'll probably get 100 different answers, and so I'm not going to do that. What I am going to do is give 3 basic claims, which you'll hear over and over in different words, the claims to the land. Claim number 1, historical claim. What is the historical argument? Historical argument, as we'll see, is saying that we've always been there. We'll go through that in a second. The second one is that of international law. That we have the right because we were given this land by the nations. And the third common argument is the argument of Jewish survival. These are the 3 general or common arguments that you'll find with regards to Israel.
I wanted to know, what about God? He said in His Word.
We'll get there. Don't worry. We try to talk about God in this class. So, we're going to present arguments, and we're also going to present counter-arguments. This is called Israel Fact and Fiction. We want to make sure that you understand that there are legitimate claims, and at the same time there are legitimate counterclaims. And because there is a counterclaim doesn't mean somebody's wrong. Rather, it's important to understand where they're coming from. And when we do understand where people are coming from, that will help us be stronger in our view, to know what we should believe. Also, I'm not going to talk about the 2-state solution. That is going to be discussed primarily next week. So if you want to hear that, the more juicy stuff, you'll have to come back next week. Now we're going to talk about more in general, our claim to the land. So the first one is the historical debate, the historical argument. Text number 6. This is from the book of Maccabees. The book of Maccabees is a book that was written with the story of Hanukkah. Many people don't know that there's actually a book called Book of Maccabees, and it has a story. And it says like this. We all know Simon, Shimon, the Maccabee, he answered Antiochus' messenger and said to him, obviously it was a discussion about the land or whatever, and he said, "It is not foreign land that we have conquered, neither is it a possession of others over which we rule. It is the heritage of our ancestors, which was for some time unjustly conquered, which we, upon obtaining the power to do so, have restored to ourselves." So he's answering the the Greek king's messenger at the time, who claimed to him that you have no right to the land. Sounds familiar, right? You have no right to the land. And then, we all look at the great Hanukkah heroes, the Maccabees, and he says, what do you mean? We always had this land. We're just reconquering the land that was always ours. So this is no new story. This is an old story. They tell a story about the Israeli ambassador who's going to address the United Nations. And he says, ladies and gentlemen, I want to commence my speech with the Passover story. He says, when Moses was leading the Jewish people out of Egypt towards the promised land, and they were traversing in the desert, and they became thirsty and they needed water. So Moses struck a rock, and there was suddenly a pond with crystal clear water. And everyone rejoiced. And Moses wished to bathe, so he took off his clothes. He jumped into the cool water, and he came out of the water and discovered that his clothes had been stolen. And he said, oh my goodness, the Palestinians have stolen my clothes. Palestinian delegate, hearing this accusation, says, what do you mean? That's a slander and it's a lie. So he says, how do you know? He says, because they weren't around then. He says, okay, so now let me start my speech. So, anyway, this is the historical argument. Now you see there's historical evidence. Okay? It says, stone going back to the time of King David. The stone inscription says to the trumpeting place found at the foot of the Temple Mount, which was a time of the Second Temple. Why do they have the trumpeting place? Because they used to blow trumpets before Shabbos, and that's what he finds on the stone written there. You find this stone, the coin of the Bar Kokhba, depicting the facade of the temple. Talking about Bar Kokhba, that is where the name Palestine came about. When the Romans finally got rid of the Bar Kokhba revolution, and they finally overthrew Bar Kokhba, they were trying to revolt. The Romans then called the land of Israel, they called it Palestina, in a way of sort of mocking the Jewish people, because the Philistines, if you look in the Tanakh, the Philistines were always those thorn in the back, if you will, to the Jewish people, always. Take a look at figure 1.2, timeline of Jewish presence in Israel. 2000 BCE, you had the Canaanites there. Then conquest by the land by Joshua, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, the Jewish Hasmonean kingdom, brief Jewish independence during the Bar Kokhba revolt. Then it was from the Romans, the Byzantines, the Muslims, Crusaders, Muslims, British, and then the State of Israel in 1948. So there's a long history here. And by the way, a lot of what you see when you're touring Israel, a lot of what's built there today is from these periods. In other words, most of it doesn't go back to Jewish periods. It goes back to the Romans, the Byzantines, the Crusaders, or whatever. And with this came the Israel Declaration of Independence in 1948. The land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people, text 7a. Here their spiritual, religious, and political identity was shaped. Here they first attained statehood, created cultural values of national and universal significance, and gave the world the eternal book of books. After being forcibly exiled from their land, the people kept faith with it throughout the dispersion and never ceased to pray and hope for their return to it and for the restoration in it for their political freedom. In 1897, the summons of the spiritual father of the Jewish state, Theodor Herzl, the first Zionist Congress, convened and proclaimed the right of the Jewish people a national rebirth in its own country. Now, you can say that you see this as well about Jerusalem. This is the city of Jerusalem from the 1800s, 1870. Romans, Persians went through this already. The Ottoman Empire, British Mandate, East Jerusalem, and the city of Jordanian control. We're going to talk about that. 1967, when that switched, and then as far as Jewish access, so you had the Roman emperor, he expelled the Jews on the 9th of Av. The Arab conquerors allowed Jews back in the year 638. And then in 1948, Jordan denies access to the Jews. And it isn't until 1967 that the Jewish people are once again able to go pray by the Western Wall. Jerusalem, the Kotel, the Holy Temple, these are all parts of our tradition. The Temple Mount, Adam created from its soil, the binding of Isaac, the altars of Adam, Cain, Abel, Noah, David, Solomon. Abraham's oath came here. Swear to me that you will not lie to my son and my grandson. Joshua's time, Jebusites inherited Jerusalem. King David's time, the tabernacle, Gilgal, Shiloh, Nob, Gibeon. You can still visit some of these places today. Gilgal. So as we see, we have a long history of being in the land. The question is this: does it give us a right to take it back? Just because we were there at one point? Okay, so now they're there. Many countries have conquered lands from other people. This land that we're sitting on was conquered from other people. Now you can say Israel took it back, so now it's theirs. You could say that as well. But just the historical argument alone, does that hold enough water? And second of all, you have another question. As we pointed out in the timeline, the Jewish people themselves conquered the land from others. The book of Joshua talks about how they conquered the land from the Canaanites. The book of Samuel describes King David's conquest of Jerusalem from the Jebusites, as we pointed out before. So, maybe it works both ways. They were there as well. They were there too first. So that's number one. So we conquered it from others as well. So this takes us to the conclusion of argument number one, which is the argument of our Jewish history. This one, the next one, is perhaps the most debated argument. The international law argument. You had the Balfour Declaration, November 2nd, 1917. Lord Arthur James Balfour, who was a British Foreign Secretary at the time, he sent a letter to Baron Walter Rothschild for transmission to the Zionist Federation of Great Britain and Ireland, in which he expressed His Majesty's government's view with favor the establishment of Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Now, why exactly did he do this? So I'll explain in a moment why. Eventually came with that the British mandate for Palestine in July 24th, 1922, and then eventually the admission into the UN in 1949. So I'm going to explain exactly what happened here. This is the letter that he wrote, Dear Lord Rothschild, I have the pleasure of conveying to you on behalf of the Majesty's government. Basically, I'm going to give you this land. What happened? So we talked before that the Ottoman Empire had control over Israel up until roughly around the time of World War I. It was very clear that the Ottoman Empire is going to fall, just as many great empires fell before. So now the British came in and said, this is a great opportunity. Let me hop in here. So what do? They said, we're going to take over. What? Yes, the Turkish, correct. There's some Turkish coffee in the back. If you want to get a taste of the Ottoman Empire, you can taste some Turkish coffee. So the British, seeing that they're going to take power because they were the next stronghold there, what do? They said, okay, we're gonna start splitting up all these lands. It was a big area, as we'll see in a moment. Now, there's one thing that the Jews always have, as you know. They always have two things. What is it? Chutzpah, okay. That's not what I was going to say, but that's true too. They have money and connections, right? As did Baron Rothschild. So he used this opportunity and said, hey, we know you guys are getting in. Well, you're my good friend here, Mr. Balfour. Give us a piece. Give us a piece of the action. And this is what he did. He made this split here. That little strip there is called, what he called, this entire area is called Palestine, by the way. It wasn't this Israel called Palestine. The entire area, which includes what's called today Transjordan or Jordan, what's called Palestine. Palestine is an area. It's not a state. Palestine was accepted as a wider area. He gave this part to Syria, to Lebanon, Saudi Arabia. Okay, and then he gave, and then he split this part off, and he called this part Transjordan, and this part he called Israel/Palestine. Now, as you can imagine, Israel was very happy with it, and who was not? The Arab neighbors. They were not very happy. Text 7b. This right was recognized in the Balfour Declaration on the 2nd of November 1917 and reaffirmed in the mandate of the League of Nations, which is the prerequisite to the United Nations, which in particular gave international sanction to the historic connection between Jewish people and the land of Israel and the right to the Jewish people to rebuild its national home. On the 29th of November 1947, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution calling for the establishment of the Jewish state in the land of Israel. The General Assembly required the inhabitants of the land of Israel to take such steps as were necessary in their part for the implementation of the resolution. This recognition by the United Nations of the right of the Jewish people to establish their state is irrevocable. It also does point out in the resolution, you can read it on your own, that they also have to be nice to the Arab neighbors. By the way, I'll point that out as well. But anyway, so then came what's called the Peel Commission. This is Mr. Peel, okay? And in the Peel Commission, what happened was in the roughly 1936 and 1939, there became a lot of havoc, a lot of chaos in Israel. There was, the Arabs were blowing up buses, and they were slaughtering Jews in the streets, and they were killing people on the road to Jerusalem. And then you had, on the Israel side, you had the Haganah, you had the Irgun. These were Jewish freedom fighters. They were, they were fighting for their land. That was eventually what became the birth of the IDF, the Israel Defense, called Tzva Haganah Yisrael. That came from the word Haganah, which was originally, at that time, the famous bombing of the King David Hotel. You know that story? So that all came during this time. And so comes along the Peel Commission, who was basically sent from the British at the time. And Mr. Peel, or Lord Peel, he was asking all the people to testify. So in here you had Muslims, you had Christians, you had Jewish representatives as well. You had Chaim Weizmann, and you also had David Ben-Gurion. Now, what did David Ben-Gurion say? They asked him, do you have a document to provide it? It was called a kushar, which was a document to provide it. And they said, you guys, I'm asking you guys, where do you come from? And all of you say what? Well, he says, I come from Plonsk in Poland. And this one says, I come from Germany. I asked the Arabs where they come from. I come from right here. I've been living here for thousands of years. So, what do? He says, do you have a document? The Lord Peel says, do you have a document to provide it? To show. So what did he do? He holds up the Bible, he holds up the book, and he says, this is my document. Now those who know history about David Ben-Gurion, he was far, far from a religious Jew. But he did like Tanakh. And he says, this is my document. So this was the Peel Commission. Eventually with the Peel Commission, this is what they wanted. They wanted this little strip to be a Jewish state, right there, you see, that orange. Then this part, the purple, to be a red, to be an Arab state. And then the green part to be mandated zone under British control. It did not end up working out for multiple reasons, and eventually the British said, you know what? UN, United Nations, it's your tsaris, you take it. And then the United Nations came up with this partition plan, as they called the Zone A, Zone B, Zone C. I'm not going to get into all the details, you can look it up for yourself. They're basically the yellow part being the Arab state, and the orange part being the Jewish state. Now, take note of this. This is very, very important. See all the yellow. The yellow. Where is that? West Bank. This part, what's this little strip here? So I'm not going to talk too much about it, but that is Gaza. Very, very important. That was not included in the UN partition plan. They did eventually capture that in 1967, which is what we're going to talk about next week. But just understand that this was the original UN partition plan. Now, the problem with this, of course, is, thank you very much, UN. First of all, we don't have the greatest friends now in the UN, as you know. And what if they change their mind? If they gave it to us, they could take it away from us. Why not? Who says they can't?
There's a mandate.
So, there's a mandate. So, there's a mandate.
You give somebody a deed, you can't take it back.
Okay. So, they do a lot of things that they shouldn't be doing. That's over here you have this is a picture from December 23rd, 2016, a vote to condemn Israel. Condemning Israel. Okay. How many times condemning Israel? Well, so many times. All right. So we'll take it away from you.
But didn't the Arabs reject the...
They rejected it. Correct. They rejected it.
All of it or nothing, so they got nothing.
They rejected it. Okay. And then what? Then was a war. And then was Declaration of Independence in 1948. Right. Correct. My point is that if you are relying on that, you could add that to your claim. But if that is your claim, then you could also come back and remove that claim. That's my point. My point is it's not the strongest claim to say that we have the land because the UN gave it to us in 1948. That's my point. Then you have the Jewish survival argument, which is we have to survive. Right? What are we supposed to do? We can't be foreigners in every land that we've been to. Text 7c, page 14. The catastrophe which recently befell the Jewish people, the massacre of millions of Jews in Europe, was another clear demonstration of the urgency. This, by the way, was part of the declaration, Israel's Declaration of Independence. It was a clear demonstration of the urgency of solving the problem of its homelessness by reestablishing in the land of Israel the Jewish state, which would open the gates of the homeland wide to every Jew and confer upon the Jewish people the status of a fully privileged member of the Committee of Nations. So this is basically what they're saying is, we have no choice, we need a place, the Holocaust, right? After the Holocaust, you need a place. Now, again over here, you have a counter argument, and again, I'm not saying that these counter arguments necessarily hold full validity, but they do have points, is what I'm saying. Number one, okay, you could have a state of your own. Who says one that it has to be with your biggest enemies? Maybe we should have one that you'll have nicer neighbors. There was the Uganda proposal. Did you know that? They offered Uganda. Many of you know that. There was a... Madagascar. You had the Birbirdijan. I don't even know how to pronounce the country, which is a way out there in Siberia. They were very nice. They were going to give a land. Actually, many people don't know this, but in the early 1800s, there was actually a parcel of land that was purchased right here in Florida, in northern Florida, near Levy County, right up north, where you live, yes. And the idea was, it was the first Jewish senator. His name was Levi, and he had purchased the land with the intention of making it a Jewish state. And that was here in the land of Florida, which eventually the Jewish state became Miami Beach. They didn't know that. It was a right state, wrong location. That's all. Now, of course, we know that Israel is the safest place in the world, as God says in the Torah. Eini Hashem Elokecha b'meresh Hashanah v'adachar Shana. The land, the eyes of the land are on it upon, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. So God's eyes are always upon it. But there's another argument, which is that you could say a greater concentration is a greater danger. Take a look at what happened in Israel on October 7th, and Jews from all over the world came running to their aid. Imagine if all the Jewish people were in one place, and actually the Medrash says that God did a favor for the Jewish people by spreading them all over the world. So that's another point. And the third point is, why do they have to give it to us? Okay, you want to survive, fine. There's a lot of nations that want to survive. So who says, therefore, just because you want it, that I have to give it to you? Now, of course, we know the hypocrisy with this, because countries that acquired land through conquest and settlement, 190 of them, and the country that was called out for it, how many are there? That's right, there's just one. Right? So no one turns to America and says, give back the land to Mexico. Right? Texas, go give back Texas to Mexico. Nobody's going to say, let's make sure that Germany and France have proper borders the way they've been 1,000 years ago. This is the way it is. There's wars, there's battles won, there's battles lost. And that's the way it is. But what we see over here is that there's an obsession. The world has an obsession with Israel. And no one is telling anyone else these things. No one is looking at the travesties that's happening in other places in the world. Everything seems to be around Israel. So what that tells us is that there's something more than just simply basic arguments that we need a land because of the three arguments mentioned. Either because we're historically there, or because the United Nations gave it to us, or because we need Jewish survival. There has to be something more. What is it that we have that the entire world is looking to us and screaming and saying, you are liars, you're stealers, you're taking everything away, you don't belong here, this is not your place? What is getting them so nervous? A little sliver of land amongst huge countries of enemies, of foes. What is going on? What is it that is driving in their kishkis to say the obsession?
Israel's success.
Yes.
Israel's success, okay.
A bit of sand.
Okay, Israel is obviously very successful, and you have, Israel is there's so much that's happening there. The Silicon Valley of the Far East, whatever you want to call it. But still, it doesn't answer. What is the obsession? Why is the United Nations giving 85% of its resolutions condemning Israel?
Do we have to go on to the United Nations?
Okay, that's a separate question. It's a good question, but it's a separate question. Do we need other nations? And at the end of the class, you'll probably understand why we do need to be involved with other nations.
It's got to be anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Anti-Semitism? Okay, but why?
Yeah.
Well, why?
That's been that way.
What do they care?
2,000 years.
But why? But why?
God gave us the way.
So let's take a look at text number 8. Interestingly enough, this is actually from next week's Parsha, but the very first portion in the Torah, Genesis 1:1. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'aretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The foremost commentary in the Torah, Rashi. asks a very simple question. He asks, why do we need the entire story of Genesis? Why do you need the story? The Torah is supposed to be a lesson for the Jewish nation. We became a Jewish nation with the exodus of Egypt. Why do we need the whole story of Genesis? Yeah, it's a history. So put it in a history book. The Torah is not a history book. Torah is Torah, a lesson. It's a lesson book. It has history that teaches us lessons. So let's take a look. Text number 8. Rabbi Yitzchak said, the Torah Ata begun the verse, this month shall be to you, which is the very first mitzvah in Exodus, which, by the way, does anyone know what that very first mitzvah is? To bless the moon. The very first mitzvah the Jewish people were given. Rosh Chodesh, to have a Jewish calendar. The first mitzvah commandment to the people of Israel. Why then does it begin with, in the beginning God created heavens and earth? He explained like this. The strength of his works he related to his people to give the inheritance of the nations. If the nations of the world will say to Israel, you are thieves for having conquered the lands of the 7 nations, Israel will reply, the entire world is God's. He created it and granted it to whomever he desired. It was his will to give it to the 7 nations, and it was his will to take it from them and give it to us. This is long before Al Jazeera came around, my friends. This is, Rashi itself was written, in the 14th century or whatever, but this is taken from the Talmud, which is from the 1st or 2nd century. But it's telling about the story of the very beginning of, not only of our people, very beginning of creation. The story of creation. Why does it say God created the heavens and earth? Because of this little tiny land. Because they're going to come and say, we want that land. Why would they care about this little tiny land? And this is what the Torah is telling us. They're going to want that land. So when it says, in the beginning, God created the world and promised Israel to the Jews. That's essentially what it's saying. That is part of creation. Without that land, forget about creation. It's not, the whole creation, in a certain sense, all is sitting and standing on this small piece of land that's in the Mideast. Now, we find as well that every time in the book of Genesis, again and again and again, every time God speaks to anyone throughout history, anytime God reveals himself throughout history, it's always connected to the land. God speaks to Abraham. He says, go from your land to your birthplace to the land that I will show you. To your seed I will give this land. He had the bris bein habasarim, the covenant between the parts. Again, God says, to your seed I have given this land from the river of Egypt until the great river, the Euphrates. What do you need with the the river of Egypt till the Euphrates? Why there? Why is it so important? Abraham has 2 sons, Yitzchak and Yishmael. This is an important one, by the way. And God says to Yitzchak, to your son Yitzchak I will give the land. And again he promises Yitzchak and says, to you I will give the land. As there are those that claim that it was to Yishmael. God once again promises to Jacob, again telling him, the land that you are at, I'm going to give you this land. It's going to be for you and your children. We just read yesterday, the burning bush, those who were here by the Torah reading yesterday. The story of the burning bush. God turns to Moses and says to him, what? Go tell the people, I am going to take you out of this land and bring you where? To the promised land, to the land of Israel. Just a few miles away from Egypt to Israel. What's the big deal? Why is it so important? Every time God talks about anything about us as a people, it's associated with the land. Why? Why is the land so important? Mashiach will come there, okay. But why then through 3,000 years of history?
God's will. God wants it.
Okay, but why? I mean, we can say that. Well, obviously, yes. We can't question. So the answer is that God tells us the answer. God tells us the answer in the Torah.
We're the chosen.
The entire Torah is filled with the land. And you know what it is? It's this. The mitzvahs in the land of Israel. Most mitzvahs can be fulfilled only in the land of Israel. It's the only place that's ideal for most of the mitzvahs. Out of 613 mitzvahs, only 270 can be fulfilled outside of the land of Israel. That means less than a third of mitzvahs can be done outside of the land of Israel. Less than a third of the mitzvahs, the 613 mitzvahs, less than a third, which is why there's very few that we could keep today. Because we're outside of the land of Israel. Like what? Did you have a fruit this morning? In Israel, you have to take off tithing from that fruit.
Would you repeat that, what you just said?
I said, if you ate something this morning, you ate a piece of fruit, in Israel you have to take truma and maaser, you have to take off tithing from that fruit. We just had last year, 2 years ago, we had Shemitah. We had the sabbatical year. You have to keep the sabbatical years kept only in Israel. There's many, 613, I'm not going to go through all of them now. Now, let's take a look at text number 9. The sages of the Talmud declared, anyone who lives outside the land is comparable to the one who has no God, as is written, to give to you the land of Canaan, to be a God for you. For all mitzvahs of the Torah were given primarily to be fulfilled by those who dwell in the land of God. So, we have to, that's a bit of a harsh statement, right? Because obviously we're not living in the land of Israel right now. So I want everyone in this room tomorrow morning to pick up and make Aliyah to Israel. But again, I'll go with you. No, but seriously, but obviously it's very clear that this is something that's very primary to the very identity of a Jew, the land of Israel. Now, there were those that claimed, there were some very, very secular Zionists who had actually said that coming to the land of Israel will absolve them of keeping the Torah mitzvahs. In other words, that the land will take that over. Then you have others who say, 1 second, hold on. Aren't we a spiritual people? Aren't we a religious people? Aren't we a people of the book? We're supposed to, be a little bit more spiritual. We did a campaign to raise funds for the end of the year, and somebody emailed me back and said, well, you're asking for money that doesn't sound very religious. So I said to her, well, giving tzedakah is a very religious thing, right? So you have some, you have this place. So actually Albert Einstein, he said that Judaism, looking for the exact words that he said, a return of a nation would be equivalent to turning away from a spiritualization of our community, which we owe to the genius of the prophets. The external necessity should all but compel us to assume this burden and let it bear with tact and patience. In other words, he said, it's an external necessity, but we're really a spiritual nation, Albert Einstein said. And so this is what some people claim, that we're a spiritual people. You don't need a land. So why do we need a land? Why do we have a land that possesses physical bodies, cities, farms, airports, army bases, Silicon Valley, creating apps, ways? How many things come from Israel today? You can name them all the things. Intel is in Israel and Microsoft is in Israel. Everyone is turning to Israel. Shouldn't they just be sitting and studying Torah all day? Why is it that all these great things are coming from Israel? What business do we have building a country with an economy, with an army? And this is, if we understand how important it is, then we'll also understand why we can't give up the economy. Let's take a look at text number 10. This is from Lord Jonathan Sacks. Talking a lot about Britain here. Yes, he passed away 2 years ago, I think. Why should a religion be tied to a land? It sounds absurd, especially in the context of monotheism. Surely the God of everywhere can be served everywhere. Judaism is not primarily about personal salvation. The relationship between the individual and God and the inner recesses of the soul. It is about collective redemption. We are social animals, therefore we find God in society. This is what we discover when we reflect on the basic structure of the Torah's many commands. They include laws about the administration of justice, the conduct of war, ownership of land, employer-employee relationship, the welfare of the poor, and the periodic cancellation of debts. Laws shape a society, and a society needs space. A sacred society needs a sacred space, a holy land, hence Jews and Judaism need their own land. In 4,000 years, for much of which Jews lived in exile, the people of the covenant were scattered over the face of the earth. There is no land in which Jews have never lived. Yet in all those centuries, there was only one land where they were able to do what almost every other nation takes for granted: create their own society in accordance with their own beliefs. The premise of the Torah is that God must be found somewhere in particular if he is to be found everywhere in general. And this is so profound. What we're saying is that God gave us a Torah. The Torah is filled with all types of physical mitzvahs that affect our physical life. How we eat, how we sleep, how we wake up, how we do business, how we act between one another, how we plow our fields, how we crop our fields, how we sell things, how we handle things. Everything is detailed in the Torah. And the Torah is saying all those things, when done properly, when done according to the way that the Torah is guiding you, those are all holy things. And you need a land, you need a place on this world that could be the place that you're going to provide it. Now, here's some examples of mitzvahs and laws that are unique to Jerusalem, within Israel. The festival pilgrimage, offerings and tithes, no house rentals. Did you know? You're not allowed to do that in Jerusalem. I mean, obviously it's not relevant today because we don't have a Beis HaMikdash. A corpse may not remain overnight. Did you know that sometimes there's funerals at midnight in Jerusalem because you're not allowed to remain a corpse overnight? No graves in the city walls, only right outside the city. Spouses can oblige to relocate, meaning if one doesn't want to, the other one does. Purim is celebrated a day later. So here you have a few examples of just Jerusalem itself. And then how much more do you have with the land of Israel in general? So now I'll ask you another question. Why Israel? Why that piece of land? What's so important about that piece of land? Obviously God chose it, right? But why is it so important for that piece of land to be there? Maybe the United States, it's a promised land. No, there were people before 1939 where there were those who said that the Germany is the promised land.
Because that's our history.
Yeah, but why? I mean, is there something about that particular piece of land? So the answer is yes, there is something actually about it. That this piece of land is the crossroads of civilization. Take a look at a map. If you take a look at a map, take a look at text number 11. If you look at a map, you'll see the geographical location of the land of Israel virtually guaranteed that it would play a key role in the tides of civilization. The old world consisted of two great land masses, Eurasia, Europe and Asia, and Africa. It was impossible to travel from Eurasia to Africa without passing through the Holy Land. Therefore, every conqueror Every civilization that passed from one continent to the other had to pass through the Holy Land and come in contact with the Jew. Besides being a gateway between north and south, the Holy Land is part of the keystone link between east and west. In the past, most caravan routes linking the Atlantic and Pacific passed directly through the Holy Land. The land of Israel was therefore literally the crossroads of civilization. You know, the 6-Day War started because of what? When the Straits of Tiran were closed to Israel and that no one could pass by here. Why was that so important? You talk about the Suez Canal. Look what's going on. You see, Yemen is not that stupid. They know that ships have to go through there. And so they're trying to control it. Why? Because this is the center of the world, literally, the center of the world. And so therefore God said, I want that piece of land, because that piece of land, when you live the way I teach you in my Torah, when you live the way a Jew is instructed to live, you can have such a great impact on society and on civilizations as they pass through there. And everyone wanted to have that connection to the land. And so this, my friends, is an entire new perspective on the land of Israel. It's not just we have a right to the land. It's not just we've been there. We're safe there. We have a military protecting us there. All those things are true. All those things are true. And I'm not, God forbid, trying to put down any of those claims. But if we don't understand why we need that land, then it's hard for us to be strong in believing that that is actually the place. And the answer is because to be a Jew, you need to be connected to that land. This piece of land is really what the identity of a Jew is. And that's why even Jews, no matter where you are living throughout the entire world, Libi b'Mizrach, my heart, is always that way. We're always praying towards Jerusalem because we know that however we're living as a Jew here or anywhere else throughout the world, we're still connected to the land because the land is our identity as a Jew. Not just because it's a place that I'm protected, not just because it's a place where my ancestors have been living. If I open up the Torah, which is my identity as a Jew, is the Torah, and I'm one with the Torah, everything in the Torah is connected to the land because that is where God's model, if you will, for the world is in that land. God had modeled everything of the world saying, how do I make a perfect world? Look at how I want you to live in Israel, and that's how I want a perfect world to be. And that's why we need that land. And that's why we could never, God forbid, give away the land, which we're going to talk about next week. But when we have that as our basis, we're not being, we're not being irrational. We're not being warmongering. We have a deep connection to this land because this is who we are as a people. God gave us a Torah. God gave us directives. This is how I want your life to live. You live your life according to this way in the land of Israel, and that could affect the entire world in a positive way. Let's take a look at text number text number 12. Sorry. It is possible to justify the existence of a Jewish state. This question raised with increased frequency in recent years. It is not just a theoretical one. Israel will endure as a Jewish state only if it can be defended in both physical and in the moral sense. Over the many years which I have participated in the debates over Israel's constitutional foundations and the rights of its citizens, I did not generally feel this question to be particularly urgent. Indeed, I believe that there was no more need to demonstrate the legitimacy of the Jewish state than there was for any other nation state. And I did not take claims to the contrary very seriously. Those who deny the legitimacy of Israel as a Jewish state were, in my eyes, little different from the radical ideologues who dismiss all national movements as inherently immoral, or who insist that Judaism is solely a religion with no right to a national self-expression. Their claim seems marginal and unworthy of systematic refutation. Today I realize that my view was wrong. The repudiation of Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state is now a commonly held position. And one, this was written, by the way, in 2003, 20 years ago. And one which is increasingly seen as legitimate. Among Israeli Arabs, for example, it's nearly impossible to find anyone willing to endorse at least Jews to a national self-determination in the land of Israel. Rejection of the Jewish state has in fact become the norm among most representatives of the Arab public, including those who have sworn allegiances as members of Knesset. More worrisome, perhaps, is the fact that many Jews in Israel agree with this view, or at least show a measure of sympathy for it. So we need to claim the land of Israel. Finally, text number 13, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. Today, overwhelming majority of all those who challenge Israel's right to exist believe in Israel's God, that is to say, the God of Abraham. They belong to a large family of faith known as Abrahamic monotheisms. To them we must humbly say, when it comes to political conflict, let us search for a political solution. When it comes to religion, let us forget that Let us work together in pursuit of peace. When it comes to religion, let us not forget that without Judaism, there would be no Christianity, no Islam. Unlike Christianity and Islam, Judaism never sought to convert the world and never created an empire. All it sought was one tiny land promised to the children of Israel by the creator of the universe, in whom Jews, Christians, and Muslims all believe. Sadly, Rabbi Isaac was right, and Rashi was right to quote him in the beginning of the Torah commentary. The Jewish people would be challenged in its right to the land by people who claim to worship the same God. That same God summons us today to the dignity of the human person, to the sanctity of human life, and the imperative of peace. And that same God tells us that in the world of 82 Christian nations, 56 Muslim ones, there is room for one small Jewish state. So what he's basically saying is, in one word, he's saying this: that God is the heavens, which is the very first mitzvah, but it's also the God of the earth. Meaning God wants us to make this place a place for Him here in this world, and that will in turn have a positive effect on not only Jews, but on Christians and Muslims as well. Play it. No, not that one. Sorry, just give me 1 second. I want to play 2 quick videos for you before we close up the class here. So, bottom line, what we're saying is that our purpose of life is to sanctify the physical world. And so God assigned a specific land for us to be tasked to create there a very mundane but perfect society. And ultimately, this is how we transform the world in a positive way. If we don't have this world, if we don't have this land, then how can we teach the world what is the right way to live? You need a model to teach the world how to live, and that is the land of Israel. Let's take a short video here. If it works.
War. He told us straight out that he's ready to die for this country. That's what it's going to take to make the land safer.
This woman, her son died in battle.
He literally told us, if I have to die for Eretz Yisrael, I have to die for Eretz Yisrael. He was ready from the start to give his heart and soul and his blood for the Am and for the people and for the land. This is our land. And it's not because, we don't have another land. This is our land. This is our Makodesh. This is our Kedusha place. This is our home. This is our history. So every soldier out there knows that they are fighting for something that is part of them. They're passionate about it. They want evil to be destroyed. They want evil out and their homeland safe. They're fighting so that Rabbi Yamin also said, he says, I'm fighting so that the Am can have the land, so that people can make Aliyah and live all downtown.
So I'm going to show you one more video. That was just the one. Finally, this video.
ישראל ונפגש ישראל הזה, ארץ אשרים אשר לקחה בו, מראשית השון ועד ראשון. אודות בניסים פון ארץ ישראל, אודות גטו דרגן ציון, פון ראש השון ביזם לסיסון ציון. Nur der Rebischte Bildach also von der Rotkunde und der Masse Massones Bochim, was der Geruch nicht in die Erde zisträuert, umgezogen nie der Tag nicht in die Erde zisträuert.
אני זוכר שנכנסתי, הכנתי לי כמובן מראש טקסט מנהלים קטן. אפשר להגיד שחצי הכבדתי אותו בכף היד.
יש ביכולת לרופית דיבריטי ובאי וקדושה ויהדות ובפרט שהמדובר בניגר לארץ ישראל אשר לפי כל המאוד קרויה היא ארץ הקדוש.
הוא אמר, אם נסתכל להיסטוריה של עם ישראל, לדורותיו, היו תקופות שעם ישראל, או ממלכות ישראל שהיו אז, הם קיימו סחר גדול עם המדינות מסביב, והיו מקומות פורחים ומשגשגים, אבל תמיד במוקד העניינים עמד הנושא הרוחני בבית המקדש. זה בשבילו היה דוגמה לזה שההצלחה לא תלויה בדבר אחר או בדבר אחר. קודם כל יש האמונה מלמעלה. האמונה נותנת כבר את הכוח לכל הדברים האחרים.
ודאי שהכוונת בשם קריאת הקדש עולה רק על שם רומא ועל שם הקראים, אלא בעיקר על שם העבר ועל ידי הפעולות בעבר ועל ידי חיים של הדרך בארץ הקדש שיהיו חיים של קדושה, של יהדות, וזה יש גם כן בדרך השם בביטחון מועדת בגשמיות כפשוטו, אשר כושר זה בביטחון מועדת ברוחניות.
ארץ ישראל, הוא אמר, היא חבית מלאה וקדושה באמונה. חסר רק ניצוץ שיצית את החבית הזו ויגרום להתלקחות של אמונה. תסתכל למשל על יהודי שחי בארץ ישראל, נגיד אפילו הוא קומוניסט. הוא יושב בארץ עם אשתו, עם הילדים, משפחתו, בארץ מוקפת, שונאים שרוצים להשמיד את המדינה ואותו. מה מחזיק יהודי כזה בארץ ישראל?
We live out out there, which we feel we are doing good for us and good for the country.
מבלי שידע על כך, הוא מאמין באלוקים. הוא מאמין שארץ ישראל ניתנה לעם ישראל.
אפילו אלו שלפני סיבס משונס קרן לעצמם בשם שלאים אם זה טוב ושוסם ובבחירות כאילו שבשעת מתן תרם עם ישראל נעשה כממלכת קרן ידי קודש.
צריכים להגיד לו ששמירת שבת, הנחת תפילין, כשרות, זה חלק בהמשך טבעי של האמונה שיש לו בלב, את האמונה שחיה בקרבו.
בדברי הרבי ראיתי גם כשהוא מדבר גם איתי כעיתונאי, שאני פרט, הוא מנסה להפוך אותי למעין שופר חיובי מבחינתו להבעת דעותיו ברבים.
All right, thank you everyone. We'll see you next week. Same time, same place, 11 a.m. Thank you so much.